There is a place in New Jersey called Camp Crystal Lake, and it is the site of some of the most brutal murders throughout the 80s and even into 2003. It is said that the lake is cursed. It has been said that it has been haunted by a monster that will not die. But before the monster came, there was another killer, his mother. His name was Jason, and his mother celebrated his birthday in the most horrendous fashion. Welcome back, dear listeners, to The Monsters We Make. And today we will be talking about the first set of killings at Camp Crystal Lake. But today I will not be doing this alone. Today I will be joined by a good friend of mine to discuss the first set of murders that occurred at the camp. Please welcome Stephen Schinder.
Hey, good to be here. And yeah, this is quite a strange case because you have the backstory of a couple things that happened in the 50s and then from the 80s onward, like you mentioned, it's like, I feel like there are some things that could be explained, but with how many things happen at Crystal Lake, it really does feel like it's cursed, even like whether you believe in that stuff or not.
So where do you stand on the Crystal Lake killer, or should I say killers? We obviously, the person we're going to be talking about today is an obvious known killer. Like, that one is known, but I'm curious, and we won't talk much about it this podcast, but do you believe that lake is genuinely cursed, or do you think it's just mass hysteria and also just copycat killers?
Well, sometimes I do think there are some things that maybe are beyond our understanding, but I do wonder if, I don't know, maybe the, Pamela Voorhees, a mother, maybe she could have had an accomplice we don't know about who could have like spooked the survivor back in 1980, or that could have been some sort of running on adrenaline and panic and just imagining something at that point. But then with all the killings that happened, all those instances after, it's like there has to have been at least an accomplice, right? Even if it's not actually her son back to life or something. And you get all these stories about how this ended up in places like Manhattan, and it's like, man, I hope that there is a rational explanation for this. I feel like I might be kind of what's a word? Well, like, I don't want to feel like I know every single thing that is possible, because I feel like that is kind of human hubris. But I do try to see if there is like a logical explanation for everything.
Yeah. Now, what is set in stone about at least the first killings is it was perpetrated by this woman and her gravestone. We'll talk about the discrepancy real fast about the date right here in a moment, but this is the grave of Pamela Voorhees, which is still in Crystal Lake. Like, her body is still there, or at least some of her body. We'll talk about that later.
Right.
What's the biggest discrepancy is the death. 1979, when these murders happened in the summer of 1980. I'm curious, why do you think that was just a common misconception, or do you think there was a reason behind it?
Well, I know that there are some people who, there are rumors that she died and then came back to life and then died again, but I kind of wonder if maybe she may have faked her death. Like, are there any records of that, perhaps?
I wouldn't know, and that's kind of odd because at the time, 1980, she was at least in her 40s, I would imagine. And these killings that continued onward, it's really difficult to say, like, how an old woman managed to take that many bodies.
Yeah, because if she was born 1930, she would have been 50 when this thing in 1980 happened.
Yeah.
Um, I do also wonder if it could be as simple as whoever engraved the stone just got it wrong. Maybe they were under the influence of something, and then once it was done, it was like, well, can't change it now, type of thing.
Or they just didn't want to. They wanted to cover it up. There's also that theory. This is also, by the way,
Oh yeah,
this is also a picture we have of Pamela Voorhees. What we know about her is that she was the cook at the camp when it was called Camp Blood, and she had, by all intents and purposes, they when the camp back in 1958, they said she was just a lovely a lovely woman to be around, always chatty, always like almost like maternal with the camp goers. The counselors liked her. She was affectionately called the camp mom, and she was a mother to Jason. Now, Jason isn't going to play a big part in this podcast, but I guess you could say that he does at the same time, because what is known is that her son was mentally disabled and physically disabled, and he unfortunately drowned at the camp. And there was some severe negligence on the counselors at the time's part. They were off having sex.
right. Yeah, it's a very unfortunate and tragic thing to happen. So you can really understand why she would snap. And it breaks my heart because all of this could have been avoided if everyone had just paid attention to that child, you know?
Yeah. It's unfortunate because this was 1958, and, the times weren't exactly, shall we say, forgiving to people who weren't a certain way. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I I do wonder, had Jason survived or never been, bullied at all, we could have avoided all of this, all of these killings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so what we know now, according to, detectives and, people backtracking a lot of the case, is that Pamela was responsible for the first two murders that occurred in 1958 that led to Camp Blood shutdown.
Right.
According to coronary reports at the time, and this is 1958 in a small town, so you gotta, some of it is lost, but what we know is that the first two victims, I am going to pull up their names real fast, so we could talk a bit about them. I'm going to get those names out real fast to you. Just bear with us for one quick second. The first two camp counselors were, I don't think they have their names. I do not think they had names. They were not named at all, or at least the records are. I'm not seeing any records of the names for the first two counselors.
That's pretty eerie.
Yeah, it does kind of lead into this, and I talked about it before, and this kind of goes with the whole thing we were talking about with the grave, was that maybe they just don't want, like the people of Crystal Lake don't want to talk about these murders. I mean, it's kind of odd, you would think, that, a town doesn't want to talk about something that makes them famous. I mean, look at Point Pleasant and Terrytown, which changed its name to Sleepy Hollow. They purposefully changed those places, those locations, to draw in tourism. And a small town in New Jersey, I mean, wouldn't you would, or are they just that ashamed of all this?
Yeah. So I tried to do some digging on my end. I think I may have found their names: Barry Jackson and Claudette Hayes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it took a bit of jumping through hoops to find all that, which just goes to show that the town really wants to bury all this stuff.
Yeah. It also might add to the whole thing of Pamela's grave, as we'll go back to that image. Maybe they wanted to say, oh, it wasn't Pamela. She was already, she died a year before the murders. But that's impossible because we have surviving records that from testimonial of the only survivor of the first killings stating it was Pamela.
Yeah, like you mentioned that people remembered her as being kind, so do you think that there were people who maybe wanted to preserve that memory of her instead of what she ended up becoming?
It's possible, but you can't hide a violent list of murders that much and hide that person and hide that memory. Not when you have enough testimonial and victims behind it to change that. I think
Right.
they were. I think they were just more ashamed than anything else, and they didn't want like. And again, I'm going to go back to what I was saying of places like Tarrytown, but then you have like places like Elm Street and Woodsboro in California where they have a, and I'm not shitting you, they have a Airbnb of the murders from the first Woodsboro murders, the first Ghostface killings.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
really just capitalizing on all that stuff.
yeah, you would think that maybe Crystal Lake, which is not a very economically sound town, would kind of jump on that. But maybe either they have more integrity, or maybe they just don't want people coming to their town. Maybe they're just it's. I can't speak on behalf of an entire town.
Well, I think what's likely is that they are very superstitious, especially since at least a few of these murders actually happened on Friday the 13th. So, I mean, you got to think of, times in the past where people were like more superstitious about stuff. So, I think that could very well be driving why they don't capitalize on it as much.
Yeah. Now, the first murders that Pamela committed were on Claudette and her lover at the time, and according to coronary reports that we've recovered, the Pamela took a butcher knife, and there were multiple stabs to the stomach, the throat, several in Claudette's vertebrae, um, the back of what was the male's
Barry?
Barry, thank you, Barry Jackson's the parts of his vertebrae were chipped off from the stabbing into his back, and you also had he was essentially gutted. The just the absolute ferocity that Pamela came at these two, and it was clear from the evidence that excuse me, it was very clear from the murder scene that Pamela walked in on them midway through having sex. They were not prepared for an attack. It's very clear from the stab wounds in the arm that they were trying to defend themselves, especially Barry. And Claudette had apparently fallen on her back, that allowing her Pamela to take the stab wounds to the chest and stomach, as I had mentioned earlier.
Right. Yeah, left her more vulnerable to that sort of attack.
Yeah. So we fast forward to 1980, and it's now Crystal Lake. It is basically Camp Crystal Lake is what it's been kept as after the renaming from Camp Blood. Which I think is a much more soothing name than a more who would that sounds like something out of a R.L. Stine novel, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, like it really makes you wonder, like, was Blood just the surname of the person who founded the camp? But even then, it's like you gotta know that it's not the most appealing name for a camp that people want to send their kids off to.
Yeah. So we fast forward to June 13th, 1980, and we have Bill Crosby, we have Maurice Taylor, Brenda Bartman, Jack Bacon, and Ned Nelson, along with Annie Morgan, and the owner of the camp, Steve Christie. There's also another person I'd like to bring up, known as Alice King, and I'm going to pull up an image of her real fast. That is her with, I believe that's Ned, if I'm not mistaken. That's a photo of that was taken of Alice. She was the only survivor of the murders. She was a very mousy kind of girl from most description of her. But she wasn't like a pure soul. In fact, there's even stories of her doing strip poker with some of the camp counselors before the camp had opened. Uh, um, so, what's your first take on Alice, Stephen?
Yeah, it seems like Alice sounds like the type of person who would try to get along with people, even if reserved sometimes. But yeah, a bit surprising that she was able to survive this, given how she's described, which, it, and, it must have been horrifying, like having to go through all of this, like, even if you do survive, uh, no matter how long you end up surviving after the fact, the living with those memories is just, it had to have been a lot to take in.
Yeah. So that is Jack Bacon on the right, and I believe that is Brenda on the left, if I am not mistaken. Um, I'll pull up some other faces of the other victims. Again, it's kind of odd how many people were murdered by Pamela in the span of one night. Uh,
Yeah, like this kind of makes me think that there had to have been an accomplice. And I mean, it was tough for me to find anything, but do we know much about Jason's father? Like, I kind of wonder if maybe that's a possibility. Like, maybe Jason's father could have been involved in this as well.
Jason's father is Pamela's husband. She didn't really talk about him that much, and not much is known around town other than
Right.
he was a bit of a womanizer. The divorce, or should I
Mm.
say, he just left shortly after Jason was born and left Pamela to raise Jason on his own. Now, that's not to say maybe after Jason's death they reconciled and they paired off. That's a possibility.
Yeah, at the very least, they both could have wanted revenge.
Yeah, I think it's also fascinating to note that again she was pushing 50 when she was committing these murders at such a fast pace, and we had victims with an arrow through the throat. We had Jack had an arrow stuck through the back of his neck and out one end and through the other through a bed. That means Pamela was lying underneath the bed the whole time waiting for someone to lie down on it.
Yeah, that would have really taken a lot of patience.
It's fascinating because like there are like again, and we'll go back to the town. It's weird, and they still act like this to this day, that they almost knew like this was going to happen. And one of those was a man only known as Ralph. This man right here. This is a image of him standing outside the local grocery store in Crystal Lake at the time, and for all intents and purposes, he would go around town, sometime mostly intoxicated, and tell and warn people to stay away from the camp, saying it had like a death curse on it. Now, did he know Pamela was still there, or was he just crazy?
Yeah, I kind of wonder if maybe he could have been in on it as well, at least in these 1980 murders, because I don't think we know what his alibi was during like the murders themselves at the camp. Um, so like that's another possibility. But then again, it's like, would he have been intoxicated then as well? And if so, then how much could he have truly accomplished if he was in on it?
Yeah. And what's also eerie is that Ralph was one of the victims found in the second killings the following year.
Yeah, or 5 years later it might have been.
5 years,
Yeah.
5 years, excuse me. Um
Yeah, or
it's
maybe one of, if there was another accomplice and if Ralph was in on it, maybe it's a whole, like, you gotta cover your bases and leave no witnesses to your crimes, type of thing.
That is very true. But I don't know. Ralph was his in some diagnoses of his body, it was shown that he was having Parkinson's. So I don't know how well a 50-year-old woman who, according to Alice, had her own mental illnesses, and Ralph, who was mentally ill, alcoholic, and had Parkinson's, how they could kill these many people in this span of time. And in the timelines are fascinating because it was just instantaneous, instantaneous, instantaneous. Like every 30 minutes, it felt like someone else was being murdered before they were dressed up in a macabre way.
Yeah.
It's very eerily similar to the first Michael Myers murders in 78.
Right. Yeah, I do kind of wonder if there's even a bit of inspiration there. Like, I might have heard of those murders and then decide to do something like this at the camp. But yeah, man, all those murders in such a short time span, it's it feels very suspicious.
It is it is rather suspicious. I'm it's also that, you know, according to Alice in her testimonials, Pamela was talking to herself in a childlike voice, that she was almost like infantilizing, excuse me, being her son again.
Yeah. Like, the trauma of having lost her son really got to her, and she was probably hearing that voice for much longer than we think. Ever since she lost her son, so for over a couple of decades, and that's got to really eat at a person. So it's, if she did all these murders, then it'd be kind of surprising if she didn't also commit some other murders between that 58 one and the 1980 one as well.
Although it's not at the camp, if that's the theory you want to go on, Stephen, because we have no records between 58 and 80 of any murders at the camp.
Right, because the camp was her main target, and so when
It was the source of her trauma.
Yeah, so when it was opening up again, it was basically like opening up the wound, and that really must have triggered something in her, and it's really sad to think about, because for all we know, maybe, obviously what she did in 58 was wrong, but when the camp closed down, maybe for all we know, the voices could have been quiet after then because she felt like she accomplished her mission. But then once the camp's opening up again, to her, it might feel like, oh no, the voice, it's coming back. I have to do something. And man, all this could have been avoided if everyone was just watching that child.
Yeah. It's also another thing that we need to bring up is that Pamela was a friend of the Christies. So she had total access to the camp when it reopened.
Right.
And it would make a lot of sense to, like, because no one would suspect her at the time. I mean, obviously they probably saw bringing Pamela on as, because I think the idea was they wanted to rehire her as a cook or have her in some capacity on staff, that maybe this is their way of having an apology for her son's unfortunate death.
Yeah, I kind of wonder why she wasn't a suspect back in the 50s, because those first murders would have been a year after her son drowned. So, like, I wonder, like, did her friends know and they sort of covered it up, or what? It really makes you wonder.
For From my understanding from reports of that, they did question Pamela Voorhees, but she had an alibi, and I don't think they wanted to push it any further because she's still a grieving mother, and the counselors, the time she had a solid alibi, and I don't think they wanted to press her further because in a small, I would imagine small town cops, it's like, oh, she's sad and she's upset, but I don't think she'd be a murderer. It's kind of like how a lot of people looked at the Norman Bates murders, like his thought process, Bates's thought process when his mother personality was, I'm too sweet. I wouldn't even hurt a fly.
Right. Yeah.
And God, I cannot wait to one day talk about the Bates murders.
Right.
The Bates Motel murders are some of my favorite case files ever. That's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, it's an interesting subject matter, that one.
Yeah. But I it's really hard because you'd think it would stop right after what happened to Pamela when Alice, and we'll get to, I guess we'll talk about this part now, is that when Alice confronted Pamela in a fight, she grabbed a machete that that Pamela was using to try to murder her. She grabbed the machete and decapitated Pamela. Now, she got away on a boat, and from there, she left Pamela's head and body behind on the banks and got in a boat and tried. I don't know why she didn't just. She wasn't too far away from the cars. Maybe just in a she was just in a panic, and also, this is the first time she's taken a person's life. Granted, that person was trying to kill her, but that's still a traumatizing sight.
Yeah, even though it was in self-defense, the sight of, being the one to remove someone's head, that can't sit easy with a normal person. So that could have broken her and made her want to escape from reality. And the boat on the lake felt like the quickest escape from reality. Maybe she felt guilty about the act and thought maybe there was a part of her that thought she would get in trouble, even though it is self-defense. And maybe when she was in the boat, she felt like she was in the state where she wanted to give up on everything and just let everything pass her by.
That is very true. Now, here's where things get weird, as if they haven't already.
Right.
When Alice was discovered by local police and taken back to the hospital, she was almost in a catatonic state for hours until she woke up asking what happened to the boy, because she believed a boy came out of the lake and attacked her. And then she's just said he's still out there. Now, we all kind of chalked that up at first. And I think even in the police reports, the police and that had a psychiatrist come in to check on Alice said that that was just probably a traumatic, that was just formed out of trauma. But when the police went to the site to collect the bodies, they collected Pamela Voorhees' body, but not her head. Her head was not found in anywhere on the premise. And on top of that, there were signs that someone had been there already. And this adds to the killings that followed years, decades even, going forward, that it led to that rumor of maybe her son was still alive. But if that was the case, then why do all this to begin with? If your son was still alive, why think he was dead and go on this rampage?
Yeah, and I do kind of wonder if we play devil's advocate, I don't think that her son was still alive, but if we try to think, okay, if Alice really did see someone in the water, could it have been an accomplice who tried swimming to the boat and somehow she was able to get away? I don't know. Like, if that were the case, I don't know why the accomplice would have a hard time pursuing her. It sounds like from these reports that they didn't have trouble getting her to the hospital, really. So yeah, it really is kind of a mystery.
Yeah. I don't know, because it's right after those killings that we just have a string of over 100. We're banking on nearly 200, I believe the last report was, of murders at Crystal Lake, and it shocks me that not only was that place not like they've tried to keep that place locked down, but it keeps happening. People like keep going to it, and it's almost like the definition of insanity. And we'll talk more about the other Crystal Lake murders another time in the near future, maybe. But the absolute insanity, was it like, is it like that thrill of being near death? I don't know.
Yeah, it really does feel like a Jurassic Park situation. You know, it's like, why can't you all just shut this down and just leave it alone? But
Yeah. Oh God,
yeah,
I cannot wait to talk about the Nublar incident.
right.
That is good. That is a can of worms as too. I don't even like the whole that whole Nublar thing. That's another time. But yeah, um, I digress. It's I don't know. There's so many unanswered questions. Like here, at least in the first killings, there's somewhat of a through line until we get to the end. And on top of that, it wasn't long after that Alice was found murdered in her apartment with a screwdriver in the side of her temple.
Yeah. So it had to have been someone who knew about these murders and someone who cared about Pamela, which again, you know, I do wonder if it could have been Jason's father. Like, I really think the idea that the son who drowned is still alive is really far fetched, but maybe someone could have used, you know, the idea of her son as, you know, a new personality to masquerade as or use as their excuse for doing all these murders.
You've talked a lot about Jason's father? Do you think that's our prime culprit for not just this but the other murders?
I mean, I feel like there might be a bit of weight to it because, you know, who else cares about Jason so much? You know, presumably cared. I know that there was like the whole leaving Pamela early on, but you know, discovering that the life he created is now gone, I feel like that I have to imagine that has to have done something, or that could do something to a father once they find out about that. And like we've been saying, it's like been really tough to find some more info about Jason's father, so it's hard not to feel tempted to believe that he had some part to play in some of these murders.
Yeah, I see. I don't know because we have no record other than he was a womanizer and a drunk and left Pamela. We have no real knowledge, and you do say you do have some solid points. I mean, maybe he felt guilty of not being there for Jason when he needed him, and also when Pamela died, maybe that it was just something. Maybe it's penance for himself and what he had done, or something along those lines, or maybe he just went nuts. It's hard to say, honestly.
Right,
I
because Pamela didn't have any other children, did she?
No, she didn't. At least to
Right.
my knowledge, there is rumors of that she had a daughter, but I that sounds a little far fetched. Like if that were the case, don't you think she would have stayed with her daughter, or found a way to keep her daughter safe? I don't know. That it sounded a little too far fetched. And also, have you heard the? I Okay, I'm gonna have to talk about this. Have you heard the rumors that Pamela found, like the rumors around Crystal Lake, and this is how far fetched some of them are, is that she found some kind of ancient book. I believe it's, let me look it up real fast, the Necronomicon Ex Mortis. It was, which is funny because that book is tied to a series of murders in a Tennessee cabin, back in the 80s, funny enough. She found this book and resurrected Jason. Do you believe that?
No, I feel like these types of books, people pretend to do like rituals because they feel like it gives them power when really they are trying to reach for something that they think will give them satisfaction. They want to believe that they can have control over everything when really life is more a series of events, some of which are very unfortunate and outside of our control. I do think there is the possibility that maybe she believed that the book could do something, like she found the book and maybe thought it could bring back her son, and maybe that led her to believe that there is validity to the voice she keeps hearing, that her son is still around somewhere and that she has to do his bidding.
That is possible. I think that's the best answer, as opposed to whatever nonsense that all that was. But again, it doesn't explain why are there so many murders in Camp Crystal Lake. And it also, like, going back, and I'm not trying to discredit your whole thing on the theory that it's Jason's father, but how can a man who was probably already like in his late 30s, 40s when these first murders occurred, and even you could explain at least the first two second sets of murders, maybe even the fourth, but you can't explain all these killings going all the way into like 2009.
Yeah, I'm thinking that for the later ones, those could have been copycats because of the legend, the reputation that Crystal Lake gained. There might be people who think that they can just get away with it, go after some campers at this lake and just pin it on Jason and try to perpetuate that rumor and think that they can get away with it just by doing that.
Yeah. Well, that's a story for another time. We will talk, or it'll be someone, possibly Steven again, or maybe myself, talking about the other Crystal Lake killings in the future. But it's so much, we can't do a whole episode talking about all the Crystal Lake killings. But to every listener watching, what do you think? What do you think drove Pamela Voorhees into this madness? And are you a believer that the murderer is still out there and it's her son? And if you don't believe, go to Crystal Lake and find out for yourself. Other than that, Stephen, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me on this segment, on this case.
No, yeah, it was a very fascinating subject matter. There are mysteries out there, and all we can do is look at what info there is in front of us for these things.
Yeah. So until next time, here's to a new world of gods and monsters.